play it? You can't even afford to polish it." Clara Whitmore's voice sliced across the marble-floored lobby, echoing against the chandelier's glass. She stood in front of the gleaming black Steinway, arms folded, lips curved in the kind of smile that belonged more to a predator than a CEO. Guests laughed politely, their champagne glasses catching the light, their eyes flicking between her and the man in the gray janitor's uniform holding a mop. David Hale didn't flinch. He looked at the piano, then back at Clara with a stillness that unsettled her laughter. "Funny," he said evenly. "Those keys you're guarding so carefully? I've touched them before, in a room 10 times this size, where the only silence came when I lifted my hands." The chuckles died. The crowd wasn't sure if it was a bluff or a confession. Clara blinked once, her jaw tightening in the slightest crack of composure. If you've ever wanted to stand up to arrogance dressed as authority, drop a like right now and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. "Keys in a room 10 times this size?" Clara sneered, snapping back with the ease of someone used to dominance. "You mean at some rundown bar? Maybe a dusty church piano?" She let the words drip condescension, savoring the way a few guests chuckled nervously again. "Face it, Hale. You're here to sweep the floors, not play them." David's calm didn't waver. He lowered the mop handle to the side, leaning it carefully against the polished wall, and met her gaze directly. "You're right. I am here to sweep." His voice held no shame, only gravity. "But the thing about sweeping? You learn how to clear away more than dust." It was subtle, but Clara's fingers tightened against her champagne flute. His words weren't loud, but they lingered like a chord hanging unresolved. Some of the younger employees standing nearby exchanged glances. They couldn't decide if they had just heard a threat, a confession, or a warning. David bent slightly to adjust the strap of the worn satchel at his side, an object that seemed out of place with his uniform. His daughter Emily had slipped a folded sheet of music inside that morning, just a quiet gesture between them. He thought of her now, 12 years old, waiting at home, believing her dad was more than the world saw. That belief was the only thing keeping his shoulders steady in this room, filled with eyes that judged him by his shoes, not his past. He straightened again, and in the silence after his words, the sound of ice clinking in a guest's glass felt almost too loud. Clara tried to mask her unease with another smirk, but it didn't land with the same confidence. She hadn't expected him to push back, not here, not in front of everyone who fed off her authority. The marble floors reflected David's figure back at him, uniform and all, and for the first time in years, he let himself imagine what it might look like to stand not as Eddie the janitor, but as himself. Not yet, not here, but soon. And as the quiet stretched, his voice came low, steady, carrying only enough for her to hear, but somehow pressing into every corner of the lobby. "Be careful, Ms. Whitmore. Sometimes the people you step on are standing exactly where you least expect them." A murmur rippled across the crowd, thin and electric. Clara laughed too loudly, trying to brush it away. She had no idea she'd just declared a game she could not win. "Where are you watching from?" "Because trust me, Clara Whitmore just chose the wrong man to humiliate. And before this story ends, everyone in this room will learn why." The last traces of Clara Whitmore's laughter still echoed off the chandeliered ceiling when David Hale turned back to pick up his mop. The crowd hadn't moved. They lingered, caught between their loyalty to power and the sharp curiosity stirred by his words. Clara's smirk had faltered, but she wasn't done. She never was when challenged. She took a step closer to the Steinway, placing a manicured hand on the glossy lid as though it were her throne. "You all heard him?" she said, her voice pitched to command the entire lobby. "Our janitor believes he's a concert pianist now. Maybe next week he'll be leading the board meeting too." The laughter she pulled from her audience sounded forced, strained. David didn't look at her. He adjusted the mop bucket, the wheels squeaking faintly against the marble. The sound cut through the tension like a whisper of defiance. "You might be surprised where some of us have stood before we got here," he said quietly, his words sliding into the air without effort. A young employee in the back tilted her head, studying him differently now. Clara noticed, and irritation prickled her composure. She leaned down, voice sharp. "Tell me, Hale, where exactly did you stand? On a subway platform? A street corner with a guitar case open for coins?" David straightened, his hand resting on the mop handle as though it were a staff. He didn't answer her bait. Instead, he glanced at the piano, its sleek surface reflecting the bright lights, and then let his eyes sweep the crowd. The silence stretched again, pulling the onlookers into a question Clara hadn't intended to create. The victory strategy advanced here, inch by inch. Clara's arrogance had planted doubt, but David's restraint planted mystery. His silence was not weakness. It was presence. In the quiet, one of the board members chuckled nervously. "Maybe we should let him try," the man said, half joking, half curious. A ripple of whispers moved through the group, some entertained, some uneasy. Clara stiffened. This was her stage, her night. The gala was meant to show her control, her wealth, her power. Now, attention was drifting toward a man in a gray uniform with calloused hands. "Enough!" she snapped, her voice sharper than intended. "We don't reward fantasy here. He cleans floors, that's all." But even as she said it, the energy in the room shifted again. For the first time, her dismissal sounded defensive rather than commanding. David bent to retrieve his satchel, slipping it over his shoulder. Inside, the folded sheet of music Emily had tucked in rested against his palm. He thought of her again, her earnest eyes that morning when she whispered, "You'll play again one day, Dad. I know you will." That whisper lingered now, steadying him as much as the mop handle at his side. He met Clara's glare with quiet resolve. "Strange thing about floors," he said. "They reflect whatever stands above them. And sometimes the reflection is truer than the image." The crowd hushed. The metaphor landed deeper than expected. Clara's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. Not without acknowledging that his words carried more weight than his role suggested. David turned away, pushing his mop bucket toward the far end of the lobby. His steps were steady, unhurried. Each squeak of the bucket's wheels seemed louder than Clara's silence, and for those watching, it was a march of quiet defiance. In his mind, he replayed the first time he had touched keys like the ones gleaming in this lobby. The warmth of stage lights, the audience holding its breath, the rush of sound filling a hall grander than anything Clara could buy. He had walked away from all of it for Emily, trading applause for responsibility, ovations for love. And yet, here he was again, standing on the edge of the world he thought he had lost. The crowd began to disperse slowly, murmurs trailing behind them. Some still chuckled under their breath, dismissing him as nothing more than a stubborn janitor. Others walked away thoughtful, unsettled by the calmness that lingered long after Clara's laughter had died. Clara watched him retreat, her smile returning in a thinner, tighter line. "You'll regret that little performance," she whispered to no one in particular, though her words carried. But deep down, her certainty had cracked. She had thrown her power against him, and he hadn't buckled. That, more than anything, unsettled her. For David, the night wasn't over. The shadow of the piano remained behind him, heavy with promise. He didn't need to touch it yet. The time would come when the keys would speak louder than words, and when they did, no one in that room, not Clara, not the guests, not even the marble floors, would forget. The mop bucket squeaked again as he disappeared down the corridor, leaving behind a silence that belonged more to him than to her. The wheels of the mop bucket squeaked in rhythm with David Hale's footsteps, echoing down the long corridor until the lobby's chatter faded behind him. He knew Clara Whitmore's eyes had followed him all the way out, sharp and calculating, but he didn't give her the satisfaction of glancing back. What lingered in that room wasn't his humiliation. It was her unease, and that was enough for now. He pushed through the service door into the quieter guts of the building, where fluorescent lights buzzed and the scent of cleaning supplies mixed with dust. Here, away from the chandeliers and champagne, David could breathe. He set the mop aside, leaned against the cool cinder-block wall, and let his shoulders relax for the first time since the confrontation began. From his satchel, he pulled out Emily's folded sheet of music. The corners were crinkled from being handled too many times, her handwriting scrawled across the top, "For Dad, so you don't forget." His fingers smoothed it flat, tracing the notes he could almost hear. A part of him longed to sit at that Steinway and let the room fall silent for the right reasons. But he also knew Clara wasn't done. She would push harder. She always did. And when she pushed, the hidden part of his life would inch closer to being revealed. That was the progress he hadn't asked for, but couldn't stop now. The corridor door creaked open. One of the younger employees, Sandra, an assistant David often saw juggling coffee trays and binders, stepped in. She hesitated, eyes darting to the satchel, then to the music sheet in his hands. I heard what you said out there, she murmured, voice low. Was it true about the piano? David folded the paper carefully, sliding it back into the satchel. He didn't answer directly. You ever notice how quick people are to laugh when someone tells them they don't belong? Sandra nodded slowly. Her voice carried a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. It just didn't sound like you were bluffing. She left before he could reply, but her words stayed behind. A seed planted in the building's whisper network, the first leak of reputation that would spread without him. This was how discovery began, not from his mouth, but from the ripples his presence created. Meanwhile, Clara had retreated to her office, pacing the length of her mahogany desk. Her reflection stared back from the window, the city skyline glittering behind her. She hated that David's words still echoed louder than her laughter. She replayed the moment again and again, the way he didn't break, the way his calm unnerved her. It was absurd, she told herself. He was a janitor, nothing more. Yet why had the board member suggested letting him try? Why had Sandra looked at him differently? She poured herself another glass of wine and told herself she'd put him back in his place. Publicly, unmistakably. Downstairs, David returned to his rounds, moving quietly through the empty conference rooms and shadowed hallways. His work was routine, yet his mind pulsed with old memories. The weight of a piano bench beneath him, the thunder of applause, the moment he had walked away from it all after his wife's passing. He remembered Emily's tiny hand clutching his at her mother's graveside, her wide eyes too young to understand. That was the night he vowed she would never doubt his devotion, even if it meant giving up everything else. Now, standing beneath the harsh hum of corporate lights, he wondered if fate had circled back in the form of Clara Whitmore's arrogance. Perhaps humiliation was simply the stage being rebuilt in disguise. The next morning, whispers spread. Sandra had told another assistant, who told a secretary, who mentioned it in the elevator. By the time David entered the lobby again, mop in hand, there were side glances and half-hidden smiles. Someone even murmured, "That's him," as he passed. Clara noticed. She always noticed. And with each whisper, her determination hardened. She would not let her gala be remembered for a janitor's cryptic words. She would corner him again, this time in front of more witnesses, and she would crush the mystery before it grew any larger. But for David, the whispers didn't feel like danger. They felt like inevitability. Every hallway glance, every quiet rumor was another note in a song building toward its crescendo. He didn't need to push. His silence was doing the work for him. He returned to the Steinway that evening, alone in the dim lobby. The polished surface reflected his tired face, the uniform that defined him, and behind it, the ghost of who he used to be. His fingers hovered just above the lid, not touching, only remembering. The silence around him was thick, heavy with both threat and promise. He drew back his hand, adjusted the mop in his grip, and turned away. Not yet. Timing was everything, and the music had to come when the world least expected it. But the game had already shifted. Clara believed she still held control, yet every whisper in the building told a different story. And David Hale, once invisible, was slowly becoming the note no one could ignore. The lobby lights dimmed into evening shadows, leaving the Steinway gleaming like a dark sentinel in the silence. David Hale's hand had hovered over it only moments before, pulling back with deliberate restraint. He knew the timing wasn't right, but the whispers drifting through the building told him one thing clearly. His past was circling closer to the surface. By the next morning, those whispers had turned into conversations. In the break room, assistants speculated. On the executive floor, a secretary whispered to another, "He's more than he looks." Did you see the way he spoke to her? It wasn't open rebellion, but the tone had shifted. Clara Whitmore could sense it. She swept into the office tower lobby that morning, draped in a silk coat, heels striking the marble with precision. Her gaze immediately landed on David, who was quietly wringing out his mop near the entrance. "Still playing Janitor, I see," she said, her voice carrying across the lobby with deliberate volume. "I almost expected you to try sneaking onto the piano last night after everyone left." David didn't look up right away. He took his time, wringing the mop until the water dripped steadily into the bucket. Then he straightened, his calm gaze steady. "Funny," he replied. "Some things don't need to be rushed. A song, for example. It only works if you wait for the right moment to begin." The bystanders, 2 interns hovering with laptops, a security guard at the far desk, went still. Clara's lips tightened. She had expected him to bow his head, maybe mutter an apology. Instead, he fed the fire of curiosity already spreading in whispers. David moved the mop back across the floor, strokes steady and unhurried. He could feel her frustration press against him like heat. But he refused to give her more than that one calm sentence. The less he said, the more they would all wonder. And wondering meant doubt. Doubt in her authority. Doubt in the order she'd built. Later that day in the cafeteria, the whispers gained new fuel. Sandra, the young assistant who'd caught him with the sheet of music, told a coworker what she'd seen. He was holding sheet music, not just random paper, actual notes, like he knew what he was looking at. The coworker's eyes widened. Maybe he really was someone before this job. The reputation leak method unfolded without David lifting a finger. By afternoon, Clara summoned her closest confidant, a board member named Harris, to her office. "This needs to stop," she said, pacing before the window. "He's turning into a distraction." Harris adjusted his glasses. "With respect, Clara, you're the one who made it public. People are curious now. They think there's more to him." "There isn't," she snapped, then softer. "There can't be." Her certainty wavered, though. She remembered the look in his eyes when he mentioned playing in a room 10 times larger than her lobby. It hadn't been bluff. It had been memory. Meanwhile, David carried on with his work, floor by floor, emptying trash cans, straightening chairs, wiping fingerprints from glass. To everyone else, it was routine. But inside, every motion carried the steady rhythm of control. He thought of Emily, sitting at the upright piano in their modest apartment, her small hands struggling with scales. She'd asked him once why he didn't play anymore. He'd told her some songs needed to rest until the world was ready to hear them again. That night, when he returned home, she was waiting with wide eyes. "Dad, I heard someone at school say you played on big stages." Her voice carried both pride and fear. Pride because she believed it. Fear because she thought he might deny it. David crouched to meet her gaze. "I did," he admitted softly. "But that was before you needed me more than the music did." She hugged him tightly, her small frame pressed against him. In that moment, he knew that whatever came next in Clara's building, he wouldn't face it alone. His daughter's faith was the anchor that turned humiliation into fuel. Back at the tower. The next day, Clara staged her next move. She invited several board members to the lobby under the guise of discussing a new art installation. But really, she wanted witnesses. She gestured toward David, who was polishing the brass rail near the staircase. "Here's our resident artist," she said dryly. "Perhaps he'd like to give us a concert." The board members chuckled politely, but one of them, Harris again, watched David with keen interest. David set down the cloth slowly, his eyes calm but unyielding. "Not today," he said. "The stage isn't ready yet." The words landed heavier than expected. Clara tried to laugh them off, but the weight of his calm refusal only deepened the intrigue. The victory strategy pressed forward. His expertise remained hidden, but the mystery had grown teeth. Clara's power had always been rooted in certainty. Now, every whispered rumor, every curious glance was a crack in that foundation. And David, silent, steady David, was the one placing the pressure. Clara Whitmore's laugh echoed, brittle and forced, as the board members drifted away from the lobby conversation. Her attempt to turn David Hale into a punchline had landed awkwardly. Instead of humiliation, his calm refusal, "The stage isn't ready yet," hung in the air like a riddle. People weren't laughing at him. They were wondering what he meant. That unsettled her more than outright defiance. David resumed polishing the rail, slow circles of cloth against brass. To anyone else, it looked like submission, just another janitor returning to his work. But to those watching closely, There was something unnerving about the way he moved, measured, unhurried, as though he knew time was on his side. Later that afternoon, in the executive break room, Sandra sat across from Harris. Her voice dropped low. "It's not just a rumor. I saw sheet music in his bag. Not the kind you pick up at a thrift store. The real thing. Handwritten notations, performance-level detail." Harris leaned back, considering. If that's true, Clara's playing a dangerous game. Word traveled fast. By evening, whispers had spread beyond assistants and interns. Even security staff were murmuring. "That janitor's hiding something," one said near the elevator. "She keeps trying to embarrass him, but somehow she looks worse every time." The reputation leak had taken root. David hadn't needed to brag, hadn't needed to prove anything. Other people were doing it for him. That night, alone in the quiet building, David returned to the Steinway. The lobby was empty, lights dimmed to a golden hush. He placed the mop aside and drew out the folded sheet of Emily's music from his satchel. Carefully, he set it on the piano's glossy lid. His hand hovered over the keys, not pressing, only tracing the space above them. Memories swelled. Thunderous applause, velvet curtains, the resonance of chords carrying through vast concert halls. He felt the weight of what he had given up, for Emily, for stability. His sacrifice had been silent, invisible. But now, standing here, that silence felt ready to break. He pulled his hand back again, heart steady. Timing. Everything depended on timing. The next morning, Clara staged another strike. This time, it was in front of junior staff gathered in the lobby for an orientation meeting. She gestured toward David as he wheeled his mop bucket past. "Take note," she said coldly. "This is where you'll end up if you don't use your brains, scrubbing floors while pretending you're meant for more." The interns laughed nervously, unsure if they were supposed to. One of them muttered, "That's harsh," too quietly for her to hear. But David heard. He stopped, straightened, and turned to face her. "Funny thing about pretending," he said calmly. "Sometimes it's not pretending at all. Sometimes it's remembering." The lobby stilled. The interns stared. Clara's face froze for half a second before she recovered, waving her hand dismissively. "Cryptic nonsense," she scoffed. "Don't mistake riddles for wisdom." But once again, the moment hadn't landed the way she wanted. The interns didn't look amused. They looked curious. And curiosity was dangerous in a place built on her control. That evening, David arrived home to find Emily sitting at the upright piano, practicing scales. Her fingers stumbled, but her determination shone. She looked up, beaming. "Dad, did you see? I worked out the left hand this time." He smiled, setting his satchel down beside her. "I saw," he said softly. "You're getting stronger." She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Some of the kids at school said you were famous before. Were you?" The question cut deeper than she knew. He crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I wasn't famous, sweetheart, but I did play in places where people listened. And one day, maybe I'll show you." Her eyes widened, filled with faith so pure it made his chest ache. "I already believe you," she whispered. That faith became his armor. Whatever Clara Whitmore tried next, whatever humiliation she thought she could orchestrate, Emily's belief was what kept him unbreakable. The following day, whispers reached a boiling point. Assistants lingered in the lobby longer than necessary, pretending to check their phones. Security guards exchanged knowing looks. Even a board member asked Harris quietly, "What do you know about Hale?" Clara noticed the shift. The lobby, once her stage, now hummed with curiosity she couldn't control, and every failed attempt to humiliate him only tightened the net around her. For David, each moment of silence was another brick laid in the foundation of what was coming. His expertise remained hidden, but anticipation was building. The building itself seemed to hold its breath. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Because Clara Whitmore hadn't realized it yet, but she was setting the stage for her own undoing. The tension in the tower had shifted. By the time Friday arrived, the building hummed with an undercurrent Clara Whitmore couldn't silence. Her attempts at dismissing David Hale had backfired. Every jab she threw only fueled the rumor mill. The janitor wasn't shrinking. He was growing larger in whispers, more than she could contain. David felt it too. Walking the lobby floors with his mop, he sensed eyes following him, conversations pausing as he passed. Some carried smirks of disbelief, others carried curiosity, but none looked at him the way they once had. The uniform still said janitor, but the air around him said mystery. Clara decided the time had come to shatter it. She ordered the piano to be rolled from its corner to the center of the lobby. That morning, staff arrived to find the Steinway positioned like an altar under the chandelier. Clara stood beside it, draped in a crimson jacket, the image of control. When David appeared with his mop bucket, she called across the floor, "Perfect timing. Everyone's been whispering about your supposed talent. Why don't you put the fantasy to rest right now?" The crowd stilled. Employees drifted closer, some pretending to check emails while keeping their eyes on the scene. Harris leaned against the staircase rail, watching intently. Sandra hovered near the edge, her breath caught in her chest. David set his mop aside. He didn't move toward the piano. Instead, he looked at Clara calmly. "You want a performance?" he said softly. "But a song played out of spite isn't music. It's noise. And noise doesn't last." The words rippled across the lobby like a quiet tide. Clara's jaw tightened. "So you admit it," she snapped. "There's nothing to you but riddles and empty talk." He didn't answer. He turned, retrieved his mop, and resumed cleaning the floor near the piano, as though her demand meant nothing. His calm refusal was louder than any note he might have played. The crowd whispered again, this time not about weakness, but about restraint. That evening, David sat in the break room alone. From his satchel, he pulled out Emily's folded music, resting it on the table beside his thermos. The hum of the vending machine was the only sound. He stared at the notes, fingers twitching faintly, as if remembering where they belonged. Sandra entered quietly, a folder clutched in her arms. She hesitated, then sat across from him. "I know you're not just a janitor," she said, her voice low but steady. "I asked around. Someone at the conservatory remembered your name. You walked away after your wife passed, right?" David's eyes flickered with surprise, but he didn't deny it. "You've been digging," he said. "I had to know," she replied. "Clara's trying to humiliate you, but if people knew who you really were, she'd lose the power she thinks she has." Her words were dangerous but true. It was the second leak, this time not from whispers of sheet music, but from someone connecting the dots. The reputation leak method was unfolding in full, whether David wanted it or not. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "People don't need to know my past. It's not about me. It's about showing my daughter that dignity doesn't come from applause. It comes from standing steady, no matter what they throw at you." Sandra nodded, but her eyes gleamed with something sharper. "Still, when the moment comes, you should let them see. All of them." At home that night, Emily was waiting by the piano, hands resting on the keys. "Dad," she said softly, "I told my friend you used to play in big places." She didn't believe me. David crouched beside her, brushing her hair back. "Sometimes people don't believe until they hear it for themselves." She looked up, eyes bright with unshaken faith. "Then let them hear." The next morning, Clara doubled down. She addressed the staff in the lobby as if it were a stage. "I want everyone to remember this. Ambition without talent leads nowhere. Pretending you're more than you are is a waste of time. Just ask our janitor." Every gaze shifted to David. He stood quietly near the base of the staircase, hands on the mop handle, face unreadable. His silence was deafening. Clara's words rang hollow against it. Harris cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Funny thing," he said casually. "I did a little checking myself. Hale's name isn't unknown in certain circles. Surprising where talent turns up, isn't it?" The lobby buzzed. Clara's head whipped toward him, her expression cracking for the briefest second. David didn't move, but inside, he felt the ground shift. The mystery had become more than whispers now. It had become recognition. The stage was forming, piece by piece, and Clara had built it with her own hands. The lobby had never felt so restless. After Harris's casual revelation, conversations rippled through the building like an electrical current. Some dismissed it as office gossip, but others leaned in, curious. A janitor with a reputation, a name remembered in circles that mattered. Clara Whitmore's grip on the narrative had slipped, and she knew it. She summoned David Hale to her office the following afternoon. The summons wasn't spoken. It was delivered by a clipped email sent to the custodial staff's inbox. Report to the CEO's office immediately. No signature, no greeting, just command. David read it once, closed the laptop in the janitor's closet, and straightened his uniform. He wasn't intimidated. The call was inevitable. Clara would try to corner him in private, where witnesses couldn't soften her cruelty. But she didn't understand yet. Private humiliation only strengthened his resolve. When he entered her office, the space felt deliberately staged. The mahogany desk gleamed, walls adorned with abstract art that screamed money without meaning. Clara stood behind the desk, her crimson nails drumming against a crystal decanter. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the chair opposite her. David remained standing. "I won't take long," he replied evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "You've become a distraction. Staff are whispering, board members are questioning, and my authority is being undermined because you can't stay in your lane." He studied her calmly. "Authority built on laughter at another person's expense is never as strong as it looks." The words struck harder than she expected. Her jaw tightened, but she pressed forward. "I could have you fired today. Don't mistake my patience for weakness. One call to IASR, and you and your daughter lose your paycheck, your apartment, everything." For the first time, David's composure shifted. But not in fear. His expression hardened. "Leave my daughter out of this." The warning in his voice made Clara pause. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone who had weathered storms she couldn't imagine. For a heartbeat, she glimpsed something beyond the uniform, something unshakable. She masked her unease with a smirk. "Then stop feeding the rumors," she said. "I want you invisible again. No riddles, no cryptic answers, no piano stories. Or you'll regret it." David turned, hand resting briefly on the doorknob. He glanced back, his voice calm but steady. "You've already lost control, Clara. You just don't see it yet." He left her standing in silence, nails still drumming the glass. That evening, back in his small apartment, David found Emily waiting at the upright piano. She had left a note on the kitchen table. "Play with me tonight?" He sat beside her, guiding her hands over the keys. The melody was simple, halting under her small fingers, but it filled the cramped apartment with warmth. She beamed up at him. "You still remember everything," she whispered. "Some things never leave you," he said softly. Her faith anchored him again. He knew Clara would escalate. She couldn't stand cracks in her control, which meant the moment was coming sooner than he thought. The following day, Clara tried a new tactic. She gathered the staff in the lobby under the pretense of a motivational address. But her real purpose was clear. Reclaim the narrative. She stood tall beside the Steinway, her voice sharp and commanding. "This company is built on merit," she declared, "on knowing your place and excelling in it. Fantasy has no room here. Our janitorial staff should be proud of their work, not pretend they belong on this piano bench." She turned deliberately toward David, who had been sweeping near the staircase. Every eye followed. The trap was set. David leaned on the broom handle, meeting her gaze with unshaken calm. "Pretending?" he said quietly, his voice carrying through the hushed lobby. "Number, remembering." A murmur rippled across the crowd. Clara's composure faltered, but she forced a laugh. "Then prove it. Sit down. Show us all you're not just a man with empty words." Dozens of eyes shifted between them. Harris folded his arms, waiting. Sandra held her breath. Even the interns leaned forward, hungry for the outcome. David looked at the piano, then back at Clara. He shook his head once. "Not yet." The refusal wasn't weakness, it was control. The crowd didn't laugh this time. They only leaned deeper into their curiosity, caught between Clara's demand and David's deliberate restraint. Clara's victory slipped further away. Every failed attempt to force him only made him stronger in their eyes. David returned to his work, sweeping calmly beneath the chandelier as though her challenge meant nothing. But inside, he knew the moment of reveal was approaching. The whispers had grown into expectation. Soon, silence wouldn't be enough. Soon, the stage would demand music. The broom bristles whispered across the marble, each stroke deliberate, measured. David Hale could feel the eyes on him still. even as Clara Whitmore stormed from the lobby in a flash of silken heels. Her challenge had landed hollow. The refusal, not yet, wasn't weakness. It was a seed. Now curiosity was no longer a whisper, but a storm gathering behind every office door. That evening, as staff filed out, David lingered in the quiet lobby. The Steinway gleamed under dimmed chandelier light, its lid catching faint reflections of passing headlights from the street. He set his mop aside and pulled the folded sheet of Emily's music from his satchel. This time, he didn't just trace the notes with his fingers. He let them brush the cool ivory keys. Not pressing, not yet, but close enough that the ghost of sound seemed to hum in the silence. Behind him, a voice startled the moment. "So it's true." David turned. Harris stood near the staircase, hands in his pockets, watching him with a gaze both sharp and curious. "I've seen a lot of men bluff their way through Clara's games," Harris continued, "but you don't bluff. You wait." David straightened, carefully closing the lid again. "Waiting teaches more than rushing ever could." Harris studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "She's going to push harder. Be ready when she does." With that, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing into the quiet. The words stayed with David long after the lobby emptied. Be ready. It wasn't just advice. It was a warning. The reveal was drawing closer, and when it came, there would be no turning back. At home, Emily practiced at the upright piano, her hands struggling through a scale. She looked up as David entered, her face glowing. "Dad, I heard a rumor today. One of the moms at school said you used to play in New York, in a hall with red seats and chandeliers. Is that true?" David's chest tightened. "Carnegie Hall," he admitted softly. Her eyes widened, shining like candles. "You really did?" she whispered. He nodded, brushing her cheek gently. "I really did. But the most important stage for me is right here, with you." She smiled, but her gaze flicked toward the keys. "Then, when the time comes, will you show them too?" Her words echoed Harris's warning. Two voices, different worlds, saying the same thing. Be ready. The next morning, Clara orchestrated another display. She ordered the Steinway polished and left the lid propped open, as though daring him to approach. She stationed herself near the piano with several board members, her laughter loud, calculated. When David passed through the lobby with his mop, Clara's voice cut through. "Careful, Hale. Wouldn't want you to scratch the $1 million Steinway with your work boots. Imagine the cost." Her companions chuckled, but their eyes flicked between David and the piano with interest. David paused, meeting her gaze. "Funny thing about cost," he said evenly. "Sometimes the most expensive things aren't worth as much as you think, and sometimes what looks ordinary holds more value than you'll ever know." The board members exchanged glances. One murmured, "Interesting way of putting it." Clara stiffened, plastering on another smile. "Philosophy from a mop," she scoffed, but the crack in her control was visible. For the rest of the day, whispers carried from floor to floor. Staff who hadn't cared before now lingered in the lobby, waiting for another exchange. Even security stopped pretending not to listen. Every word Clara spoke to diminish him, only amplified the mystery. By late afternoon, Sandra slipped into the janitor's closet while David filled his mop bucket. "She's losing ground," Sandra whispered. "People aren't laughing anymore. They're waiting." David met her eyes. "Waiting for what?" "For you to show them," she said simply. He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. She nodded, understanding. "Then when it happens, make sure it happens on your terms, not hers." That evening, David stayed in the building long after the last employee left. Alone in the golden hush of the lobby, he stood before the Steinway once more. He placed Emily's sheet music on the stand, fingers hovering above the keys. This time, he pressed down, just once. A single note, deep and resonant, filled the air. It lingered, vibrating through the marble, echoing off the chandelier crystals. For a moment, the entire lobby seemed to breathe with him. He lifted his hand, silence returning heavier than before. He smiled faintly, tucking the sheet back into his satchel. Not yet. But soon. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Because when the first chord finally comes, it won't just be music, it will be revelation. The single note David Hale had played the night before still seemed to vibrate through the lobby the next morning. He had left quickly after, but something about that sound, just one key pressed with quiet intent, haunted the building. Security guards mentioned it. An intern swore she heard it echoing as she left. By the time Clara Whitmore arrived, the air was already alive with expectation. Clara stepped out of the elevator in a fitted navy suit, her heels striking marble with irritation. She saw the Steinway gleaming under the chandelier, polished to perfection, lid propped open as if waiting. The whispers around her infuriated her. A note? That's all he did? And they're acting like it was Beethoven? She muttered under her breath. David was across the lobby, mopping in slow, deliberate strokes. He looked up briefly, meeting her eyes, then returned to his work without a word. That restraint cut sharper than defiance. Clara's voice carried. "Hale, care to bless us with another masterpiece? Or are we still pretending silence counts as talent?" Some staff chuckled nervously, but most stayed quiet. Harris, leaning near the staircase rail again, said nothing. Sandra, standing by the front desk, watched closely, her arms folded. The balance had shifted. Clara could feel it. David didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he wrung out the mop, the squeak of water dripping into the bucket louder than her taunt. Then he said, calm as ever, "Music isn't noise, Ms. Whitmore, and sometimes one note says more than 1,000. The words landed heavier than she expected. Harris gave a soft chuckle, not unkind. Clara's cheeks burned. She snapped something under her breath and turned away, but everyone had seen it. Her power was slipping, and his silence was louder than her laughter. Later, in the break room, whispers turned to questions. "Did you hear him? He knows exactly what he's doing. Do you think he really played in New York?" The reputation leak had evolved into something stronger, a collective belief that there was truth behind the mystery. That evening, David walked home through the cool night air. Emily was waiting at the apartment, seated at their upright piano. She looked up eagerly. "Dad, did you play it? The big piano at work?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "One note." She gasped like he'd admitted to magic. "I knew it!" She scrambled onto the bench beside him, placing her small hands on the keys. "Then next time, play more. Show them what you showed me." Her trust was unshakable. He hugged her close, feeling the weight of her faith anchor him. Every step of this wasn't just about him, it was about her. Clara thought she was playing a game of humiliation, but David knew the truth. He wasn't fighting for pride. He was fighting for Emily to see that dignity could survive even in the harshest spotlight. The next day brought escalation. Clara convened a morning meeting in the lobby, not for business, but for spectacle. She positioned herself beside the Steinway, her voice sharp. "Our company thrives on merit," she declared, "but we also thrive on knowing limits. Overstepping them is dangerous. Some people," she glanced directly at David, "forget where they belong." All eyes turned. David, standing near the mop bucket, lifted his gaze slowly. "Belonging isn't something another person gets to decide," he said evenly. The lobby fell silent. Even Clara's allies didn't laugh. Harris finally spoke, his voice carrying across the room. "Clara, you're proving his point. The more you try to put him down, the more you elevate him." The blow landed clean. Clara's smile tightened, but cracks spread beneath her confidence. She dismissed the crowd quickly, storming back toward the elevator, but the damage was done. Sandra caught David later in the hallway. "They're ready," she whispered urgently. "If you sit down at that piano now, no one will laugh. They'll listen." David shook his head. "Not yet." "Then when?" she asked. "When the silence is loud enough," he said softly. That night, back in the empty lobby, David placed Emily's sheet music on the stand again. This time, he pressed 2 notes. A harmony. The sound filled the air, rich and haunting, resonating against the marble walls. He closed his eyes, letting it linger. Then he stopped. The reveal would come soon, but when it did, it would belong to him, not to Clara's mockery. The lobby seemed to breathe with him as he turned away, leaving the piano waiting for the next moment. By Monday morning, the atmosphere in the tower was taut as a drawn bowstring. Everyone had heard about the two notes David Hale played late Friday, though no one had actually been present. The story spread like wildfire, transformed by whispers into myth. Some claimed the sound had carried through the entire lobby. Others swore it had been more moving than any full piece they'd ever heard. Clara Whitmore arrived furious, knowing the building buzzed not with her directives, but with anticipation of a janitor's next move. She entered the lobby with deliberate sharpness, heels clacking across the marble. The Steinway still stood at its center, polished like an idol under the chandelier's light. Her voice rang out as she scanned the staff gathered for morning routines. "This ends today. We're not here for fairy tales. A mop doesn't turn into a baton just because someone whispers it might." Her words landed heavy, but they didn't erase the curiosity in the crowd's eyes. People didn't disperse. They lingered, waiting. David appeared from the side corridor, mop bucket in tow, his steps unhurried. He set it down near the staircase, acknowledging no one at first. Then, quietly but firmly, he said, "Strange thing about fairy tales. Sometimes they're just truths disguised until people are ready to hear them." Murmurs rippled. Clara's nostrils flared. "Then prove it. Right here, right now. Sit down and play, or admit you've been nothing but a fraud hiding behind riddles." The silence that followed was thick. Dozens of eyes pinned themselves to David. Harris leaned against the banister, lips pressed into something between a smile and a dare. Sandra stood near the front desk, her hands clutched nervously. Even the security guards edged closer, abandoning their posts. David looked at the Steinway, then back at Clara, his jaw set. "No," he said simply. Gasps broke across the room. Clara laughed sharply, triumph flashing in her eyes. "See? Nothing. Just smoke and mirrors. This charade ends here." But her victory evaporated almost instantly when Harris spoke up. "Or maybe," he said evenly, "he understands something you don't. Music isn't about obedience to demand. It's about timing, and he controls that, not you." The crowd shifted again, energy tilting back toward David. Clara's smile froze. David picked up the mop, resumed his strokes across the marble, each sweep unhurried, as if the moment hadn't rattled him at all. But, inside, he knew the time had come. The whispers had swelled into expectation too loud to hold off much longer. His silence had carried the tension as far as it could. Soon, the notes would have to speak for him. That evening, David returned home to Emily, practicing at their upright piano. She looked up, her face glowing. "Dad, the kids at school said you're going to play at the big piano. Is it true?" David crouched beside her, brushing his hand across her sheet music. "What do you think?" "I think you will," she said, her voice certain. "And I think they'll all listen, even the ones who laughed." Her faith steadied him more than anything else. He hugged her tightly, her small arms squeezing his neck. For her, he knew, he couldn't back down when the moment finally arrived. The following day, Clara raised the stakes once again. She called an emergency staff meeting, ordering everyone into the lobby under the guise of corporate unity. Standing beside the Steinway, she gestured dramatically. "This instrument is worth more than some people make in a lifetime. It symbolizes excellence, culture, achievement. Not everyone is worthy of it." Her eyes found David across the room, mop in hand. Some people should remember their place before they embarrass themselves further. David set the mop aside, his voice calm but cutting. "Funny thing about symbols, they don't care who touches them. They only reveal what's already there." A hush fell. Clara's control frayed with every sentence he spoke. The staff didn't laugh anymore. They leaned forward. Harris finally broke the silence. "I think it's time," he said, eyes fixed on David. "Not because she demands it, but because we're all ready to hear it." Clara's head whipped toward him, fury in her glare. "You're siding with him?" Harris shrugged lightly. "I'm siding with truth, whatever it is." The crowd turned to David again. This time, he didn't refuse. He walked slowly toward the Steinway, each step echoing against marble. He placed Emily's folded sheet music on the stand. His fingers hovered just above the keys, breath steady. But then he stopped. He closed the lid gently, turned back to the crowd, and said, "Not yet." The gasp was collective. Clara's laugh came shrill, desperate. "Coward!" she hissed. But the people didn't see cowardice. They saw control. They saw a man choosing the moment, not bending to humiliation. The silence after his refusal was heavier than any note he might have played. And for the first time, Clara's authority shattered visibly, her power mocked by the very anticipation she had built. The stage was ready. The crescendo was near. The hush that followed David Hale's refusal lingered long after Clara Whitmore stormed out of the lobby, her heels striking the marble like hammer blows. She had expected triumph. Instead, she left behind a silence that belonged not to her, but to him. Staff scattered reluctantly, murmuring in voices too low to catch, yet every whisper carried the same undercurrent: anticipation. David returned to his closet office that evening, the scent of cleaning supplies sharp in the air. He sat on the worn chair, Emily's folded sheet of music resting on his lap. His fingers traced the notes like they were etched into him. He knew the moment was approaching. He could feel it gathering like a storm. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every challenge Clara had hurled only pulled the audience closer. The stage was set. All that remained was the timing. Across the building, Clara was unraveling. In her office, glass of wine trembling in her hand, she paced in front of the skyline. "He refuses, and they respect him for it," she snapped to Harris, who had been summoned against his will. "A janitor controlling my lobby, my company, my people." Harris didn't flinch. "Not your people, Clara. People respect what they can't control, and he doesn't bend." She slammed the glass onto the desk, liquid splashing across polished wood. "Then I'll break him." The next morning, she staged her grandest attempt yet. The lobby was transformed into spectacle, an unannounced company gathering with staff ordered downstairs. The Steinway wheeled into prime position. She stood beside it, radiant in a tailored black dress, the image of command. Cameras from internal communication staff were positioned, ensuring every angle captured her performance of dominance. David entered quietly from the side, mop in hand. All eyes swung toward him. Clara's voice rose above the murmurs. "Here he is, the man who speaks in riddles and hides behind silence. Today, we end this circus." She gestured to the piano. "Sit, play, prove what you claim to be, or walk away and admit to everyone that you're just a janitor chasing old ghosts." Gasps spread. Phones rose discreetly, employees recording what felt like the climax of weeks of tension. Harris folded his arms, expression unreadable. Sandra held her breath, eyes fixed on David. He set down the mop. For a moment, he didn't move, letting the silence stretch, thick and unbearable. Then, slowly, he walked toward the Steinway. Every step echoed beneath the chandelier, every footfall turning the lobby into a concert hall of waiting hearts. He placed Emily's sheet music on the stand, smoothing its edges with care. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling only with memory. He closed his eyes. For a moment, the lobby was Carnegie Hall again. The red seats, the chandeliers, the world holding its breath. Then he began to play. The first chords rolled out rich and full, filling the lobby with sound that seemed too vast for one man. Conversations stopped, phones lowered. Even Clara, frozen beside the piano, forgot to breathe. His hands moved with effortless mastery, weaving music that poured from him like truth made audible. It wasn't just notes. It was grief, sacrifice, love, and dignity. It was Emily's faith. It was every moment he had swallowed his past to raise her, every humiliation turned into resolve. The marble carried the resonance. The chandelier crystals caught the sound and scattered it like light. Sandra's hand covered her mouth, tears pricking her eyes. Harris let out a slow breath, shaking his head in quiet awe. Even the interns, who days ago had laughed at Clara's barbs, stood transfixed, faces wide-eyed and reverent. David didn't falter. The music built, layered with strength and aching beauty, rising to a crescendo that seemed to press against every chest in the room. When the final chord thundered into silence, the lobby remained frozen, air still trembling. And then, applause. Not polite claps, not forced acknowledgement, but an eruption, hands slapping, voices cheering, even whistles echoing. The building shook with it. Clara's face burned crimson. She tried to speak, but her words drowned under the ovation. her stage, her piano, her company, taken from her in an instant. David rose from the bench slowly, placing the sheet music back into his satchel. He didn't bow, he didn't smile, he simply stood, calm and steady, the janitor's uniform still on his back. And yet, no one saw a janitor anymore. They saw a man who had just revealed himself. The victory strategy was complete. His hidden expertise, his past as a world-class pianist, had silenced the arrogance of wealth and replaced it with awe. He lifted the mop again, returning to his work as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The lobby had never felt so alive. The echoes of applause still clung to the marble walls, lingering long after the last notes of David Hale's performance. For years, the Steinway had been nothing more than a symbol of Clara Whitmore's wealth, a centerpiece she used to flaunt her status. But in a single morning, it became something else entirely, a vessel for truth, dignity, and revelation. David sat quietly on the bench for a moment longer, his fingers resting loosely in his lap. He didn't bask in the applause. He didn't look for validation. He only thought of Emily, of her tiny upright piano at home, and the way her eyes had lit up when she told him, "Let them hear." He had. And the world had listened. Clara stood frozen beside him, her jaw tight, her composure fractured beyond repair. For weeks, she had tried to belittle him, to strip him of dignity in front of her kingdom. Yet now, in the kingdom's very heart, she had been the one stripped bare. Her voice, once enough to silence rooms, felt useless in the face of music that needed no words. The staff watched her, not David, not Harris, not Sandra, but Clara. Their eyes said what no one dared speak aloud. "You lost." Harris finally broke the tension, his voice calm but firm. Excellence isn't about titles or money. It's about what remains when you strip all that away. Today we saw it, and Clara, you do well to remember it. The words hit harder than any applause. Clara's shoulders stiffened, but she offered no reply. For the first time, she had no weapon left. David rose from the bench, placing Emily's folded sheet music back into his satchel. The uniform still clung to his frame, a reminder of where he stood in their hierarchy. But in the eyes of everyone gathered, that uniform no longer defined him. He was more than a janitor. He was proof that the human spirit couldn't be boxed in by title or mocked into submission. Sandra approached him quietly, voice trembling with emotion. "That was more than music. You didn't just play. You reminded us of something we'd forgotten." David met her eyes. "We forget too easily that dignity doesn't come from where we stand, but how we stand." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. Around them, staff members lingered, reluctant to return to their routines. The building didn't feel like the same place anymore. The walls had witnessed something Clara couldn't erase. Later that night, David returned home to find Emily waiting by their upright piano. She looked up at him eagerly. "Did they hear you?" He smiled, crouching down so his eyes met hers. "They did. And they'll never forget." She hugged him tightly, the simple warmth of her embrace grounding him more than any applause. For her, he wasn't the man who had reclaimed an identity. He was just her dad, the one who chose her over fame, the one who kept his promises. And that was enough. The next morning, whispers filled the building again, but this time they weren't speculation. They were reverence. Security guards stood taller when he passed. Assistants smiled warmly. Even board members greeted him with nods of quiet respect. Clara avoided him entirely, retreating into her office, her laughter gone. David continued his rounds as he always did, mopping floors, emptying bins, polishing railings. The uniform remained, but the way people looked at him had changed forever. He had not demanded respect. He had revealed it. And through it all, he carried Emily's faith like a shield. The piano performance wasn't just about silencing Clara. It was about proving to his daughter and to himself that sacrifice hadn't erased his worth, that dignity could survive ridicule, that legacy wasn't built on titles, but on truth. For Clara, the loss was more than humiliation. It was transformation. Her authority, once unquestioned, was now colored by the memory of that morning. Every time she passed the Steinway, she felt the phantom weight of David's music pressing against her chest. She couldn't erase it. She couldn't outspend it. In a way, it had remade her as much as it had remade him. By the end of the week, the building itself felt different. Not freer, perhaps, but aware. A janitor had stood taller than the CEO, not by fighting, but by revealing, and everyone who had witnessed it carried that truth forward. David didn't crave the attention. He didn't need the whispers. His only victory was Emily's smile, her belief affirmed. Still, when he passed the Steinway late one evening and let his hand brush the polished lid, he allowed himself a quiet smile. Clara had chosen the wrong man to humiliate, and in doing so, she had given him the stage she never meant to. Now, the story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who had been in that lobby, to everyone who had seen dignity outshine arrogance, and maybe to everyone listening right now. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Title: Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?